Mauri ora I te whare. Ronnie here. Ai, ko hukarangi te maunga, ko waipu te awa, ko nuku tai memeha te waka, ko Ngāti Porou te iwi, ko te papatipu o uipo atu te whenua. Aku mihi ki te kau haukainga. Tēnā koe, pap, koropa, kia ora pap. Waku mihi aroha hoki kia koutou, te whanau o mona. Me aku mihi ki te ātāhuatanga o tā tātou hui. Thank you for calling us together, Ani. It's my honour to be able to speak with you about Matike Mai Aotearoa and specifically the teachings of Mona on this kaupapa. As mentioned, I was incredibly fortunate to have learnt from him over several years about Matike Mai, and I'm certainly grateful for the opportunity to be able to share some of those teachings with you today. Shout out to all those ones online. I know we have some of our kaiarahi tiriti, another project I'm running, so tēnā tātou I te hunga whakarongo. So for those of you who are just learning about Matike Mai, first and foremost, it is about nothing short of transforming the Pākehā governing system we have here in Aotearoa to one that more accurately reflects the values and systems indigenous to these lands, as proclaimed in he whakaputanga and guaranteed in te tiriti o Waitangi. So Matike Mai is therefore not a new kaupapa. It is something our tipuna have sought since the encroachment of kāwanatanga over our lives. And as you will know, we've done so in many ways, as talked about earlier, Māori parliaments, partnership proposals, Māori autonomy movements, and the list goes on. So Matike Mai whānau is really just what we call it today, with the added challenge that sadly, today colonisation is not just over our lands and bodies, but for many of us and many of our whānau, also over our minds, through the suppression of our knowledges and ability to perceive and imagine how things could be different. So what Matike Mai is not about is entrenching the Māori seats we currently have in Parliament or seeking entrenchment of te tiriti and what Ani would warn us would inevitably be the Crown's interpretation of te tiriti in the current Pākehā constitutional arrangements that we have. Rather, it is about a return to our own notions of power and authority and the values that are inherent within those. So Matike Mai in many ways is in fact a process, conscientisation and action for the ultimate restoration alongside te reo, alongside tikanga, of what might be our ancestral understandings of the systems that provide for who we are as peoples with rights to self-determination on our own lands within this world. And this is really summed up in a kōrero that Mona gave to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. This is in New York in 2012, where the theme that year was on the doctrine. So he stated, "We as Indigenous peoples will also seek to rebuild the damage it, the doctrine, has caused in ways that reflect the power and the beauty of who we are. The spirit and hope of that power has never died. In 2009, our people decided that we should independently begin to formulate a new constitution for our land based on our own laws and values. We also undertake the work convinced that a constitution for our land must come from our land. We believe that the imposed colonising constitution from Britain grew from that place, and that we must find something which breathes from the stories in our own land." In terms of the importance of progressing this kaupapa, as a part of that kōrero in New York, he also went on to say, "Without a fundamental shift in the way governing decisions are made, then we would remain trapped within the clutches of all that the doctrine of discovery presupposed. We are not naive enough to think that the colonising power will immediately accept the work that we do. However, we are hopeful that by beginning such a dialogue, we will truly rediscover who we once were and who we might once again be. So, to further explore the teachings of Moana about Matike Mai, there has been a bit of a trend whānau where people are being asked to tell stories, like how Moana told stories. And so what I wanted to do to really explore Matike Mai is to share with you some stories about what he taught myself and others, and just in his usual, gentle but really lightning bolt slap type of way of bringing things into your consciousness and putting you to work. So, my first story about Moana and Matike Mai is about our time at Waitangi. So, I'm a member of a group called Te Atukura. There are many of our members here. And one of our annual activities is we head to the north for Waitangi Day. And initially the idea was so that we could sit and learn in the open forum tent, where the real kōrero happens. But we were incredibly fortunate to have been adopted by Moana and Meriana. And so really primarily learnt from them and the kōrero that they would give us back on our marae in the evenings. Now, Meriana would share with us her fabulous stories about what real activism is, whānau. And Moana would often give us a kōrero that really stressed that depth, breadth and beauty of who we are as Māori, and his enduring message, as you will all know, to have faith in ourselves, our tipuna, and our own values and systems that we inherit from them. And so it was maybe 11 or 12 years ago, the story, and we were sitting in the wharekai at Kawati Marae in Waiomio during Waitangi Week, this is in the north. And Moana had just given us a kōrero in the wharenui that mentioned relationships with our whanaunga of Te Moana Nui a Kiwa and understanding our place in the world as islands in the ocean. And the latest thing at the time in the tertiary sector whānau, where I was working, was the merging of Māori and Pacifica and sometimes new migrant roles and services into one. And I was just about losing my mind over what I felt, was the invisibilisation of ourselves as tangata whenua, of our te tiriti rights, and in our framing as a needs group alongside these others instead. And so on this night, following Moana's kōrero, I just, started voicing to him my concerns. He could tell I was a bit worried about what he had talked about, and just exploring the implications of this merging, politically and constitutionally. Because, of course, whānau, my head at the time was caught up in the current system we have, which is about competition and conflict and numbers, and how that was coming out, I'm ashamed to say, was in my resentment. And Moana, in his magic way, was literally able to see through all of that and cut through it to the real issue, which of course was my mind being captured within that colonial frame. And all he said to me was, Veronica, there is space for everyone on the marae. And whānau, it was like a lightning bolt cutting through my emotional frustration storm and through all those layers. So, the first lesson from the first story with regards to Matike Mai and Moana is that Matike Mai whānau is about us. It's not about what has been imposed on us. It's not even about what's happened to us. It's about who we are, our own notions of authority and values and processes. And this is the task that is before us, to rediscover together or decolonize, some would say, our understandings of power and authority, and imagine an Aotearoa where those things live and guide us again. And it's not that we don't need to be on top of the current system whānau and struggling with it, because it does continue to cause us so much harm. But Matike Mai ultimately is about returning to us as a long-term solution to all of that. So, lesson 1 from Moana, it's time to get our diva on, whānau. It's all about us, okay? Yes. My second story about Matike Mai is actually about the first time I ever met Mona. Some of you will have heard this story before, but for those that haven't, I was really being taught about Matike Mai from the very first moment I met Mona. It was 2005. I had just taken up a role with Te Mana Ahunga, the National Māori Tertiary Students Association, who Mona was mentoring, alongside a million others. And I was being introduced to him by our outgoing president, Helen Potter. Raise your hand, Helen. This was on a girlfriend, a cafe at Lambton Quay in Wellington. And I was nervous whānau, but also being a rangatahi, I was like, Hundi. And so before long, us three were in this intense discussion about all tiriti matters under the sun, and eventually we came to the matter of treaty claims and settlements. And being young whānau, I was perhaps, unappreciative of the immensity of the effort and struggle that goes into claims, and then having to negotiate in what is already a predetermined, unjust framework. Because what I was doing in this hui was I was complaining to Moana, really, about our claims and settlements. And my question to him was why we were only asking for the return of lands and resources as opposed to the return of political power. Because it seemed to me that that was the obvious issue, that original suppression of our rights to govern ourselves. And what he said to me was, "You're absolutely right, Veronica, and when you put in a treaty claim about that, I'll support you." And my heart stopped. But it was a really important lesson, whānau, because lesson 2 from Moana, Matike Mai work is for everyone. Because there, it's not just for our political leaders or our scholars or our experienced activists. Because there I was, 24 years old, and Moana was telling me not if I did it, but when. And don't get me wrong, whānau, the Waitangi Tribunal didn't accept our claim. They wouldn't even give it a Y number, actually. But rather, they wrote back to us, really interesting, because what they did at the time is that they wrote back to us and they said that they didn't have the jurisdiction to look into constitutional issues. But yes, that's not what they were saying to the North, was it? So these whānau are the te paparahi o te raki reports, okay? If you haven't looked into them, there goes your first set of Matike Mai homework, okay? But whoever you are, the lesson from Moana whānau is that any ideas that you might have about challenging the constitutional status quo, about challenging the preconceived belief that what we have is what will always be, or any ideas that you have about returning to ourselves and restoring our own systems, then the spirit of Moana, follow your idea through whānau, put it into action, because to progress Matike Mai is definitely a kaupapa for everyone, okay? Along those lines, the third story I want to share about Moana and Matike Mai is just briefly about the Rangatahi project. So this story is from 2012, when I was invited by Moana and Whai Margaret to attend a Matike Mai hui at Waipapa Marae, Auckland University. And I had been at the working group hui the year before, but at this hui, Moana told me he had a task for me. Yikes! And that was that he wanted me to coordinate a rangatahi group to engage other rangatahi nationwide on the Constitution. No other instructions really, whānau. Just that he had a group of rangatahi keen to do this mahi. And my own studies are in Pākehā politics and policy. And at the time, I was also a young lecturer in this area. And I remember thinking, oh, ki toki, nationwide project engaging rangatahi on a kaupapa that the colonial system has spent, 170 years ensuring we feel we have no connection to, are completely dislocated from, we think that it doesn't relate to us. What could be difficult about that? And a year later, we had 13 regional teams, over 80 Matike Mai Rangatahi educators nationwide, running a 2-hour workshop that had been designed by the rangatahi with drama and spoken word and props and videos. And by 2015, when we presented to Mona and Whaia Margaret at Waitangi our kōrero from Rangatahi as to a future constitution for Aotearoa, this was to feed into the Matike Mai report. By that time, we had held 75 rangatahi hui nationwide. So third lesson, whānau, from Moana about Matike Mai. Whatever idea it is that you have, you can do it. Moana believes you can do it, whānau, because one idea, rangatahi should be running their own wānanga, can turn into a nationwide movement. And I know that the panel are following me. You will hear from some of these young people about that. And there was just one thing I wanted to add here for all you organisers out there, okay? All you organisers that are used to running projects in kaupapa, is that the entire national project that we held over the 3 years that it was initially run, is that we ran it on $32,000. And love. Love whānau in terms of aroha, in terms of volunteer hours and whatever support we could get in the regions from local Māori. But that's it. That's literally it. So while I'm not trying to promote volunteer workaholism, we're already Māori whānau, don't let challenges like funding hold you back, because where there is a will, there are a million Māori ways. Okay, next story about Mona. This is in a bit of a different angle. But with regards to Matike Mai, what I wanted to share with you also about Mona and the constitutional kaupapa was just how truly visionary he was in terms of what most people would consider thinking outside the box, but which was undoubtedly, just his everyday thinking. And this story is about when Miriana, Mona and myself, we were on our regional haerenga throughout Te Tai Rāwhiti, so up the coast. This is in October 2013, and we were speaking at hui that were being hosted at home about Matike Mai. And we'd been up the coast for about a week. We'd held hui in Gisborne, Uwawa, Tokomaru Bay, Te Aroha, and we're towards the end of our haerenga finishing up in Rotorua. This is where I'm from. It was late at night. This was at Kariakapa on the stretch there, you ones that know, in the Wharenui, Ngāti Porou. And I don't know if he was just feeling particularly invigorated by being at home, or maybe we'd had a cruisy day and he was feeling rested, because it was quite late at night, which was unusual for Mona. And for the first time, whānau, I remember feeling intellectually cornered by him. And, one of the things I really appreciated about Mona, was his patience. All of his mentees will be able to talk to you about that, because we would debate these ideas, and it's usually just a frustrated rant on my part. And he had this really generous way of either confirming for me my ideas were on the right track, or, patiently and kindly correcting me. But this night up the coast, boy, he'd had his version of whatever Red Bull is, okay? Because 1 minute, we're just sitting there having an everyday, friendly Matike Mai discussion, and next minute, he starts putting the intellectual screws on me, whānau, and just starts questioning me about the most outrageous scenarios, Ani. Not quite what if Māori were living on the moon, but almost. And what it was, is we were sitting there in the wharenui, and I was like fantasising about, mana whakahaere of hapu, over our whenua, whoever may be living in our whenua, and he asked me where hapu fit in our constitutional future who no longer had whenua. And I was like, oh yeah, you mean don't have access to their whenua because it's been stolen? Yeah, we need to figure that out, And he was like, I can still remember it, whānau was sitting there at the table like this, he used to fold his arms. Oh man, he was sitting there and he goes like this to me, no, I mean hapu and new hapu who have emerged in future who have no whenua. And at the time, whānau, I was like, but said to him, but even if they don't have whenua moana, they're spiritually, politically from somewhere between rangi and papa they are from, And so we, it was a long debate, whānau, and I couldn't quite get there, into the night. And just like I'd seen him do to others, but I myself had yet experienced at the time, he really cornered me. And he cornered me into admitting, no, I don't know what it means to be Māori without connection to whenua. And I feel a bit ashamed that I said that, whānau. But I also don't, because I still sort of feel that way. And but what I promised Mona is that I would think about it, and I will. And so this is the lesson, whānau. This is the lesson from Moana. All the scenarios, we need to think about it. We need to imagine and dream and consider it all, because what Moana was really asking is what are our core values and systems that make us who we are, that will see us and our mokopuna through the immense changes that the future holds. Climate change and water security and food sovereignty and international conflicts and everything that's going on with technology. Who will we be? What will make us Māori? And then my own, personal concern is, how will being Māori guide our children and our mokopuna and protect them from unnecessary suffering? And see them through into that future where they are well and thriving. And so asking these questions is the task that Moana is asking of us in Matike Mai whānau. Okay, one last story, just one. And this one I actually want to share is about a Moana-inspired Matike Mai activity. So, in Te Atakura Educators, we run Te Tiriti o Waitangi Wānanga. Nearly every week whānau, we run a Wānanga. And one of the things that we do in these 2-day Wānanga is that after we've spent an entire day with Wānanga participants studying exactly what our Te Tiriti says, why those things are in there, so, the basics, Aotearoa, a Māori country, kāwanatanga over British subjects only, tino rangatiratanga, continuing for our people. The next day, what we then do is we give them a short activity looking at our current Pākehā constitutional structure. So what we do is we say to them, right, so we have Parliament, and then we have government, and then we have the courts. Okay, and we ask them, remembering that they've just spent a whole day studying Te Tiriti, exactly what it says and why, we then ask them, so where is our Te Tiriti in this current structure? And not in the outcomes of those places. For example, we know that there are, that there's legislation that is, has been released that mentions Te Tiriti, and we know in the courts right now they're going nuts about tikanga, going nuts about tikanga in the course. And so we say to them, yeah, not in those outcomes, but in the structure itself, where are our provisions of Te Tiriti reflected? And then we say to them, go. All the participants, they've then got 2 minutes to debate amongst themselves, and it's always this really frantic, quick, Where's Te Tiriti, looking at that structure? But every week, whānau, it doesn't take people long to say to me, Ronnie, this is a trick question. Because we can't see Te Tiriti anywhere in our current constitution. It's nowhere. And usually, whānau, because our Wānanga are about 40 to 60 people, usually there'll be that one person that pops up, Ani, about the Māori seats, and then we have a big debate about that. But in all honesty, that conversation is usually shut down pretty quickly by other participants, because everyone can see at this point, no. They are an unsatisfactory expression of tino rangatiratanga because they are, in fact, in the kāwanatanga sphere. And this is when, in our Wānanga, we introduce them to Matike Mai. And these Wānanga whānau are with our people, but we also hold them with community orgs and national associations and public servants and government departments, where there might be a few of our people, but the rest are Pākehā and Tauiwi. And they see it. Even they agree, whānau, that it's undeniable that what we have reflects nothing to what was agreed to. And I'll just say, I've only ever had one person challenge me on it, and it was a Crown Law person who has snuck into one of our workshops, who tried to challenge me on, but Veronica, rangatiratanga, and what I can tell you, whānau, is that even though they were challenging me on it, everyone else was looking at them like, what an egg. Yeah, very proud teacher moment that was. So the lesson, whānau, just from our story about our activity, as big as this kaupapa may seem, it is realistic, despite what some may think. Because when presented with it, people understand and agree that we need to build something new. And I can honestly say, for every overt racist out there that we meet, there are 100 people we encounter who are open to learning our history, Te Tiriti, to considering what their relationships to these lands and our people might be, to what a future might look like based off Indigenous values and cherishing what truly makes us unique in the world in terms of calling Aotearoa home. Koro whata be that they are ready emotionally or intellectually or spiritually, I don't know. But the people that we come across are ready, and we've got to be all over that whānau. The time is now. Because what I do know, is that in Moana's time, back in the day in Meriana's time, Ani, people like Annette, people weren't ready. Well, people still aren't ready for Annette. But our Te Atakura experience, whānau, is that every week the majority of people we come across, their hearts and minds are open and they are just waiting for Māori to lead, okay, to provide those answers. So another point about Matike Mai, the time is now. And you will all be aware of Moana's 2040 homework due date for this whānau. And just the one last thing that I wanted to say, because I know just to mihi to Koe Val Napoleon, who is here from the Cree and Giksan people on Turtle Island, is that, Whai Val talks about, being caught in despair. And this is one of those points, whānau, is that, for all the awfulness that we have to revisit and explaining to people what happened, and what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the white supremacist fantasies of clearing us from the land for them, and for those of us that could be civilised, training us to be a servant class for them. All of that awfulness is just about us understanding how we got here. And the real task is in Moana's teaching about remembering, restoring, and having faith in who we really are and who we could once again be, ourselves, our nation, and in the Constitution. So I'm gonna finish whānau, and I just wanted to finish by sharing the piece that I wrote for the work that Ani has put together, being launched this afternoon. Is that right, Ani? Oh, yes. Because I'll just say it because I didn't realise it until after Ani, but my piece is actually about Matike Mai. It's about all those different learnings I had with Mona. It's about mention some of the moments that I've just shared with you in those lessons, as well as a few others. For example, the Rangatahi visits we did. Actually, to be completely honest, my piece starts with the first public talk I ever gave when Mona was there, and it was a rangatiratanga symposium that Papa Bill was helping hold at Te Herenga Waka by the Human Rights Commission. This is 2006, and after I gave that talk, it was the first time Mona ever kissed me. It was on the forehead, and I thought, oh, I'm never going to wash my forehead again. Oh, but anyway, so my written piece goes like this, okay? The first time I had just spoken, nervously but resolute, about rangatahi and rangatiratanga and hope. Smiling, you told me you agreed. Things can be different. Listening to you debate into the wee hours about kāwanatanga and compromise and or conscientisation. You could not be swayed. No, you insist. Things can be different. But they're treating us like a chocolate box, moana. My head caught up in colonising numbers, competition, and long-term division. You remind me there is space for everyone on the marae, and I remember bursting into tears. Relief and gratitude. Yes, things can be different. There are our ways, and they're born of these lands. Cleansing truths, clearing space for ancestral wisdoms. Welcomed on a misty winter morning, excited hands straightening school uniforms and big smiles. Can I ask something? Beautiful brown skin over curious eyes. What's tikanga? This mokopuna has never heard the term before. Although I keep a straight face, my heart cascades. Years of tipuna laments. Do not despair, you tell me. With all the mahi by rangatahi these days and of your generation, things will be different. I unravel from what is, willing myself to unfurl to what could be. Aotearoa 2040, unravelling from what is, unfurling to what could be. And what of hapu in future who, say, have no whenua, you ask? I feel my mind stretch. But we're literally sitting under hikurangi on the lands of Uepohatu. I can't do it. These are the questions we will need to ask ourselves and find answers for in future, Veronica. So just as I think I can go no further, you wrap your arm around me and we step into both the old and yet to be known. Tēnei taonga o te manawa nui, tēnei taonga o te manawa ora. Tēnā koe e te moana nui a kiwa, my hero. Kia ora tātou.
E kore rawa e mutu te whawhai atu ki te kāwanatanga we will never give got the right to fight for what's right. Oh no, we will not, we will not.
Thank you, Annie.